Chapter 7. The Journey is a Success. The trek over the Rocky Mountains was harder than any of them could have ever imagined. At some points, the incline was so steep that even the sure-footed horses started to slip. The men would have to take the heavy loads off the horses and carry the supplies themselves until the ground leveled off again. It was not yet winter. Still, snow came up to their knees as they got higher, and sleet froze the rest of their bodies. On top of all of this, food was running dangerously low. There were no berries to gather or deer to be hunted. They met up with a small group of Indians who kindly gave them some of their food and traded a few tired horses for new ones. But they couldn't rest long. They needed to push ahead in order to make their goal of reaching the Pacific before real winter set in. The Corps, weak and freezing, was miserable. I have been wet and as cold in every part as I ever was in my life. Indeed, I was at one time fearful my feet would freeze in the thin moccasins which I wore, Clark wrote. When they stumbled out onto the Wepe prairie, they were exhausted and starving, but alive. The friendly Nez Perce tribe greeted them with food that the Corps gratefully feasted on. The dried fish and berries the Indians offered were so delicious, the men gorged on them until they became sick. A friendly face. Wherever the Corps of Discovery traveled, they met different tribes of Indians. No matter the band, Sacagawea proved invaluable. She reconciles all the Indians as to our friendly intentions. A woman with a party of men is a token of peace, Clark explained. After the travelers regained their strength, the Indians gave them good news. The Pacific was only 12 days away. But there was also bad news. The 3 rivers they had to travel to get there had some fierce and dangerous rapids. A couple of Nez Perce Indians went with the Corps to help them navigate the rough water of the Clearwater River. On October 16th, 9 days after leaving the prairie, they made it to the Columbia River, which would take them directly to the ocean. Their destination was so close, but so far away. By early November, they were only about 20 miles from the ocean, but they had to stop and make camp. The river was rocking with waves, making everyone, including Sacagawea, very seasick. With winter almost upon them, they stopped to build a camp on the Pacific coast. They named the camp Fort Clatsop in honor of the Indians who lived in the area. It never seemed to stop raining that winter. The Corps had to eat rotting meat because there was no way to dry it, and the camp was infested with biting fleas. When Clark fell ill due to the damp weather, Sacagawea had the opportunity to repay him for the way he had nursed her back to health earlier in their journey. Not long after New Year's Day in 1806, the Corps heard from local Indians that a whale had washed ashore not too far from the camp. Lewis and Clark decided to take a few men all the way to the shoreline so that they could get meat and blubber to eat. Sacagawea, who wasn't part of the group, spoke up. She hadn't come all this way with a baby on her back, not to see the ocean. It must have been hard for her to speak her mind, but no harder than traveling 4,000 miles in the harsh wild. The trip took 5 days of treacherous rowing and climbing, and when they arrived at the present-day site of Cannon Beach, Oregon, the whale was nothing but a skeleton, picked clean by animals and Indians. Still, Sacagawea reached her goal, to see the great big sea. Chapter 8. Saying Goodbye. On March 23, 1806, the Corps of Discovery turned around to make the long trek home. Going back seemed like it would be easier, since they were driven by the satisfaction of achieving their goal, and also knew where they were going. But they had one last big scare. While the group was staying with the Nez Perce again, Baptiste got sick. For 18 days the little baby, who had been over mountains and to the sea, was deathly ill. Lewis and Clark tended him night and day and wrote about his condition in their journals. Everyone was worried he was going to die. The captains applied onion poultices to his swollen neck until finally the infection cleared. Baptiste survived. In June, the Corps headed back into the Rockies. Only this time they had 5 guides from the Nez Perce who knew the mountains like the backs of their hands. The trip that had taken 11 days the previous fall took only 6. Once they had cleared the Rockies, Lewis and Clark split up to find different routes back to the Mandan villages. Sacagawea went with Clark's group to the Yellowstone River. While on the way to the river, the trail opened onto two different mountain passes. Clark didn't know which one led to the Yellowstone, but Sacagawea did. This was the land of the Shoshone, where she had been raised. Pompey's Pillar. As they neared the Yellowstone River, Clark and the rest of his group saw a big flat rock rise up from the plains. On closer inspection, they found carvings from Indians. Inspired, Clark carved his name and the date, July 25, 1806, and named it after Jean-Baptiste, whom he called Pompey, so the rock became Pompey's Pillar. August 14, 1806, 1 year and 4 months after the journey began, the Corps of Discovery arrived back in Fort Mandan. Lewis and Clark never found the water passageway, but they did their job. They mapped the land, found a route, noted the vegetation and geology, and made contact with the Indians. And they never could have done it without Sacagawea, whom Clark said has been of great service to me as a pilot through this country. Saying goodbye was almost as hard as making the trip. Clark, who truly came to love Baptiste, wanted to adopt the little boy and give him an education. Charbonneau and Sacagawea declined the kind offer. Their adventure had been amazing, but now it was over. Chapter 9. Sacagawea's mysterious death. 3 years after the expedition, Sacagawea, Charbonneau, and Jean-Baptiste had a change of heart and decided to join Clark in St. Louis. Charbonneau was motivated by a congressional grant of 320 acres of land. They only stayed for 2 years before they were back on the road. After Charbonneau sold his land to Clark for $100 and left Baptiste to be educated by the lieutenant, he and Sacagawea joined an expedition to start a fur trading post up the Missouri River. Sacagawea remained in Fort Manuel along the Missouri River in present-day South Dakota, where she gave birth to a daughter named Lisette in August 1812. The fort's clerk, John Luddick, wrote the news of the day in his journal. On Sunday, December 10, he sadly reported that this evening the wife of Charbonneau, a snake squaw, died of a putrid fever. She was a good and the best woman in the fort, aged about 25 years. She left a fine infant girl. From the written evidence, most historians believe Sacagawea returned to South Dakota with Charbonneau in late 1811 and died there a year later. However, there is a second story that has Sacagawea living to the ripe old age of 94 on the Wind River, Shoshone Reservation in Wyoming. People who claim to know Sacagawea included teachers, farmers, and even the minister who attended her funeral in 1884. History is not always cut and dry. When you go back into the past, especially far back, it can get confusing. Scholars read different accounts from many people to try and figure out what really happened and what it means. Though no one can really be sure about Sacagawea's death, everyone can agree that she was a true American hero because she pushed herself beyond the definition others gave her. Sacagawea is the definition of a trailblazer. 10 things you should know about Sacagawea. 1. Sacagawea was born in 1788 or 1789 in the area now called Salmon, Idaho. 2. She was an Indian from the Lemhi Band of the Shoshone tribe. 3. In 1800, when she was about 11 or 12, she was kidnapped by the Hidatsa tribe and taken to live in their village. 4. She married a French-Canadian fur trader, Toussaint Charbonneau, and had a baby boy named Jean-Baptiste on February 11, 1805. 5. In the spring of 1805, Sacagawea and her family joined the Corps of Discovery, the expedition led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to find a route from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean. 6. Sacagawea not only spoke two Indian languages, Hidatsa and Shoshone, which helped her translate for the Corps, she also made encounters with Indian tribes easier because the Indians assumed any group traveling with a woman was peaceful. 7. When Sacagawea reunited with her band of the Lemhi Shoshone in 1805, she discovered that her brother, Kamawayat, had become chief. 8. She helped secure horses from the Shoshone, which the Corps desperately needed to make it over the Rocky Mountains and complete their journey. 9. Sacagawea insisted that she join the small group who went all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the beginning of 1806. 10. Historians can't agree on when Sacagawea died. It was either at the age of 25 or 94. 10 more things that are pretty cool to know. 1. Believing they were descended from wolves, the Shoshone tribe considered coyotes and dogs close relatives. 2. Clark was a big fan of nicknames. He gave the nickname Janie to Sacagawea and called John Baptiste Pompey. 3. Sucking on fingers, what Sacagawea did when she was reunited with the Lemhi after her kidnapping, was a Shoshone sign for family. 4. The Corps of Discovery met nearly 50 different Indian tribes during the expedition. 5. Charbonneau was paid $500.33 for the expedition. Sacagawea was paid nothing. Lewis received a salary of $3,360 for 4 years of service, while Clark got $2,520. 6. Clark measured the length of the expedition from St. Louis to the Pacific Ocean at 4,162 miles. Based on modern measurements, Clark was only off by 40 miles. 7. The debate over Sacagawea's place and date of death got so heated that a private investigator, Charles Eastman, was sent from South Dakota to snoop around Wyoming in 1925. The evidence he found led him to believe she had died on a reservation at 94. 8. When Baptiste was 18 years old, he met a German prince and traveled back with him to Europe, where he remained for 6 years. When he returned to the United States, he became a wilderness guide. 9. There are more monuments to Sacagawea in the United States than to any other woman. 10. Sacagawea replaced Susan B. Anthony on the $1 coin in January 2000.